Oh la la. Oh.
People like games.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a conversation with. We haven't done this in a minute, and we have a very cool, very special guest that you might not recognize if you're not on Twitter, or you might recognize if you're a big gaming fan. Rami Ismail, he of formerly Vlambeer Studios, now a international game developer ambassador. I think that should be right.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I'm trying to find a proper title for current because it's not still head of Vlambeer. So it's like
it's hard. It's really hard. I don't even know what my title is right now. So I'm just listening to how other people introduce me and then figuring out whether I like it. That was pretty good. I like it.
The international man of game development is here to talk some gaming. Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
And I guess I'll ask a question that I love to ask everybody to get things right in the flow, because the beginning of these interviews are usually the weird part where you got to find a basis to talk about. Mm-hmm. What game are you playing right now? That the first thing someone's like, yeah, what have you been playing? You're like, yo, listen, you got to try this.
Right. I'm very boring when it comes to games. I play a lot of things, right? And I play a lot of things all the time. It's kind of like in the Netherlands, they call it beroepsdeformatie, professional deformation. But, my life has become playing a lot of games until I get it, right? Mm-hmm. Which is pretty fast. Most games you get pretty fast, and then you finish them because you're curious about what happens next. But I just want to understand them most of the time. Mm-hmm. So I play a lot of games really quickly, but then the two big games that I keep playing over and over are Destiny 2, mm-hmm. which is Destiny is probably my favorite game of all time, probably the game I've played most in all time, and then Flight Simulator, because I really love aviation. I've been trying to get a real life pilot's license, and it's surprisingly good practice. So beyond that, let's see, something random I'm playing right now. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga.
Any good?
Game Boy Advance game. Yeah, way back. And it's still good. I did not expect it to still be good, but it is still good. I
do have to ask, what does understand mean? So do you go in looking for, is it, so as a developer, is it something you're looking for mechanics? You're like, okay, let me see what inspired this, just get a lay of the land of what this is about.
Every game is a little different, but, for some games, you can kind of, you get this, and especially since I work with a lot of developers, right? And especially since I work with a lot of developers, when games are still in progress, they're still being built, you kind of get a feeling for what the goal of a game is, like what they're trying to get at. And sometimes for some games, it's telling a story, right? It's like, okay, we want to tell the story. Papers, Please is a mechanical game, but it's a very story narrative driven game. It's trying to make a point about corruption and how good people end up doing bad things for good reasons, right? Or for fair reasons, or for understandable reasons. So even though that game is fully mechanical, you can't understand Papers, Please until you realize what it's trying to do, right? But then you have something like Call of Duty, which has a really big story, but the point is not the story. 100%. The point is the spectacle, right? But then when I play a Call of Duty, you hit a scene, and I remember Infinite Warfare was one of those games that really, really nailed that. And you have one of the first missions, and you start in Geneva on the ground, and you get in the spaceship, and it shoots off to space, and now you're doing a dogfight, and now you're landing on the spaceship, and you get down there, and the captain is dead, and you have to take the captain's position. And now it shows you the map of all the missions you can do. And at that point, I'm good. That's mission 2 of the game, but I understand. Right?
Okay. So unless there's something further, like say that storyline there, you're like, okay, this will be a spectacle first-person shooter that will sort of environmentally set me up versus narratively.
And Call of Duty Infinite Warfare is about the weight of command and the need of sacrifice, right, for certain things. And that's what the game is about. It's about you have your main character. Your main character is angry at the captain because the captain almost sacrificed the entire crew of the ship to stop this enemy that suddenly wrecked all this stuff, to stop that enemy from fleeing. And your main character is like, are you kidding me? He almost sacrificed the entire crew. And at that moment you go that's where the game is ending. It has to end there. It has to end there. It has to end with the captain, with your character understanding why the captain did that. Because why else would they make such a big deal out of it, right?
That's funny, yeah. It's sort of like a movie where there's certain movies that give you the pieces, and maybe narratively the end point already, but the question is, how interestingly enough can you get me to the end point that we're both already sort of anticipating?
So in that way, games work the same way, but it can be an art, it can be a mechanics, it can be a narrative, it can be in all these things. Some movies are about cinematography more than about stories. Some movies are about music more than about vision, right?
Different
Every movie has
studios.
something. But a game can be 45, 50, 60 hours. So usually I play until I'm fairly confident that I got what the game is. And then I say, okay, done. This is good. I understand. I read up a bit about it. And if I read something and I'm like, oh, wow, didn't expect that, I go back. Then I play more.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But
so what game? So I mean, I guess as someone who's worked in it so professionally, you're sort of, experience and sort of playing even is different than a casual gamer where I don't understand maybe the mechanics that go into that Call of Duty or some of the things where if someone shows you something interesting technically. But is there any games that sort of come out that even you yourself, maybe say in the past 2-3 years, have been like, how did they do that? Like, how did you guys make this?
Yeah, I mean, Nier Automata blows my mind to an incredible degree. The way it uses games, that game works better if you're more of a gamer, which is wild. But they're using your knowledge of games kind of against you to sort of like create tension and create like interest, right? Yeah, it's a very slow burn game, but like I played the first time and people had told me, right, like, no, just push through, right? Yeah. And then when I got to the first moment, about a third of the game in, the first third was a good game. I had a good time. Very, very agreeable action adventure, RPG elements, post-apocalyptic, desaturated, kind of cool stuff. Yeah. Beautiful music. And then you hit that one point where everybody's like, no, you have to play until there. And you just sit there and you're like, yo, what? What? No, huh? And you start to see that. The other one that really got me was a game called 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, which is a visual novel told from 13 semi-unreliable protagonists that weave through each other on like the narrative, imagining sort of like the flow chart of how that narrative must have worked is already too big for my brain.
This now we're going to start getting into some very interesting questions because you already answered what your favorite video game series of all time was, but now this pushes more so into sort of what video games are as a medium. So firstly, what is it about video games that make you prefer them to other mediums, whether it's a narrative sort of, what is it?
I think video games have some very unique properties that just make it a fascinating medium. Like I love writing. And I love movies, I love TV series, but there's something about games, about the slow burn of a lot of games, about the interactivity, about the ability to be the main character instead of experience the story of the main character from another perspective that you just can't get anywhere else, right? You can't get the feeling of responsibility from a movie. You can understand that people have responsibility, but you can't feel responsible.
Making the decision yourself.
And messing it up or getting it right? You can't feel pride, you can't feel regret. There's a lot of things that games uniquely can do. I think the other thing I like about games is that they're kind of like little mind puzzles, not the other way around. Not your brain has to solve the puzzle. No, the game is puzzling with your brain. It's like trying to fit certain things in such a way that you feel a feeling.
Yes.
Or you get tense.
I think about Little Discovery, which is like that wall will be slightly darker shade of the rest of the wall, and your brain catches that, and it's like, oh, hey, it's rewarding it, but by nature of putting
and then also like the language there, right? Because that's a language. We've learned to speak this language. My mom started playing video games a few years ago. She doesn't have that language, so when she goes into a building and she sees a wall and it's like kind of broken and it has like the brick sort of exposed, every gamer will look at that and be like, I have explosive.
Gotta go through there.
My mom goes there and she looks at it and she's like, ooh, this looks unstable. I should stay away from it.
That's
because the building might come down. And you know what? 100%. She's right. She's right. But we've learned this language for decades.
100%.
We speak it fluently.
That's too funny you mentioned that because my girlfriend and I were playing Pokemon, and it's the same sort of the gamer's logic of where you're supposed to, or how you're supposed to navigate the map, everything types, and you forget how much built up knowledge occurs. So now this is where an interesting part comes in, because I agree with you in terms of the interactivity and the ability to sort of engage in these the actual, what's the word of the requirements of a story emotionally more directly when you're being able to be the person or the character. So in your time now, as games have developed, there was a great moment where those sort of pieces came together, technology, narratively. There wasn't sort of the internet trying to push in. And so you had that sort of 2000s time period of beautiful, amazing made first player games. Now we're sort of paused on that, right? So now we're sort of entering a new decade. You are from the most interesting version of gaming, which is you came through mobile game development. And so you were coming through a time where now the definition of a gamer was expanding from consoles, PC gamer, something new. So first I'll ask, what to you is the definition of a gamer?
Well, gamer is hard. Like, here's the thing. I think the honest answer is I don't care much, right? Like, because here's the thing. I think what's important is that when you go back, right, to the start, and this is going to get really philosophical, so bear with me for a second.
Always there.
The games are play, right? And play is a form of interaction, a form of existence, playfulness, right?
100%.
If I grab a random thing, if I grab this USB stick and I just sort of like throw it up, I'm playing, right?
The game.
Because there's a success state, there's a failure state, and I'm doing something in a safe context, right? So play is this force. It's a very important force, because if you go back in time long enough, eventually you get to, say, the first humans, right? Everything we know now, everything we can do now, every language we speak, every skill that we have was developed through play. Because how do you get language? You make sounds at each other. And then at some point it becomes playful. And then you suddenly understand that this word is bread, right? Or whatever it was, tree, tiger, whatever the word was, whatever sound it was, right? And if you were somebody and you had a spear and you just decided to just see if you could hit that tree, that playfulness, right? Not to survive, not to get food, not to defend yourself, just to see if you could hit it. You would survive longer because you would have a better shot at hitting something because you've practiced just for fun. Not for any other reason, just because you want to. If you climb trees, you would survive longer because you would climb a tree faster, right? So right? It led to science. Because science is effectively, you're doing experiments, but you're not expecting necessarily that it's going to work. It started probably playful, right? So we are, as a medium, we carry that torch. We are the digital implementation of play. The oldest torch in the history of mankind, presumably, right? So to me, everybody is a player. Everybody is a gamer. Everybody plays. It's just some of us lose it.
Yes,
right.
100%.
Some of us lose that. Some of us lose that want to play. Some of us get so stuck in the day-to-day life, get so stuck in work that we refuse to play. And it's sad, you know, when you see somebody and somebody kicks a ball at them, just a slow ball, seeing somebody think and walk past it because they have to get to work and not have the time to just kick it back.
Engage in the world.
That hurts. Because I've traveled the world for a decade, right? Meeting developers everywhere. And no matter where I went, rich, poor, Western, non-Western, places where life was safe, places where life is unsafe. You take a ball and you kick it at them or you throw it at them. Everybody understands it. It doesn't matter what language you are, what age you are, what culture you have, what faith you believe, what race you are. Like, none of it matters. You have a ball, you understand it's playful, right? That to me is what games are. So then asking what a gamer is, to me, kind of defeats the purpose. Everybody is a gamer. Have we made the right game for them?
Well, so you asked an interesting question because you've now been around the world, right? So as that expansion of gamer, right? So initially, arguably, a gamer was a very specific Western, U.S. or European white person with a specific number of socioeconomic wealth that was gaming, right? So all the gamer logic that we just talked about, that wall even, right? That's foreign to the people who are in these new countries that are starting to enter into it, right?
So,
but the social dynamic is still fresh to them, right? So do you see a different in the type of development then, or the type of focus on what a gamer is in, say, when you go to Africa or the Middle East or the West?
For sure. I mean,
and how are those differentiate that you've seen?
Because the language of games is sort of co-developed between the Western world and Japan primarily, right? It doesn't mean that all of it is from there. And people have been playing games across the world for a very long time, right? When I was an Egyptian kid, we had a Pody station, which is a bootleg PlayStation that is actually a Super Nintendo that has 99 games on it, but only 10 of them are unique. And then all the ones are ROM hacks of those 9 games. So I had like Super Mario Bros. And then game 14 was like Super Luigi Bros. And it just swapped the sprites of Luigi and Mario.
Emulator packs.
Exactly. That stuff.
Yeah, we grew up
just
on
a real cartridge. Exactly. That is the stuff. So they've been playing games. They have that language, but the context of play is different. So in Egypt, if you wanted to play games, in the Netherlands, when I was 6, we got our first computer. In Egypt, that would be rare to have a computer at home. So in Egypt, the context of computers was go to a net cafe. Yeah. Which means that the games you ended up playing were automatically more multiplayer games. We played Soldat, we played Quake, Unreal Tournament, those kind of games, right? Games 100%. You play against each other. In the Netherlands, I played Transport Tycoon. I played Roller Coaster Tycoon. I played some StarCraft. But I was messing with but mostly games for me. And then occasionally I would play online, right? I played Diablo, but I didn't play Diablo online until much, much later, right? Yeah. So in the Netherlands, play was me, and in Egypt, play was with my friends, right? Yeah. Play some FIFA, right? Yeah. Kick some soccer balls, or Pro Evo, depending on what side of that conversation you ended up on, because that was a big fight around the world for a long time. But
back in the days.
Yeah, it was. This was the big conversation. Are you FIFA or are you Pro Evo? And which Grand Theft Auto do you play? Those were the two big questions. Was kind of like that, but because the context is different, expectations of games are different as well, right? So if you look in a lot of Asia and large parts of Africa, they kind of skipped the computer age, right? They went straight into mobile, where mobile devices are your computers. Everything you do on a mobile phone, you pay via your mobile phone. Far before.
I think we might have an internet issue here in a second. Got you frozen. I don't know. Yep.
All right.
Do you hear me now?
I'm back. Yeah,
yes, we're back. We're good.
So, but in Africa and in other places, people would pay via their mobile phone. They pay with their phone plan, way before that was possible here in the Western world. So when the context of the world changes, games change.
Yes.
And that's not just true across the world, right? Like, for example, one of my favorite things is the roguelikeification of PC games.
Yeah. Hades was one of the best games I've played in a long time.
Phenomenal. And I love that it happened. But you know why it happened?
Because it was inspired by...
inspired by another roguelike, right? And then there was another roguelike that was inspired by another roguelike. And then there was another roguelike. And some of them were inspired by Nuclear Throne. I think Nuclear Throne has a line straight to Hades, right?
Absolutely.
But the reason it happened is Twitch. Twitch became a big thing, right?
Yeah.
So if you want your game to be played on Twitch, name some things that would be good for that, right? Okay, so you want a game that people that's easy to watch.
Yes.
Right. You want a game that you can play a lot.
Yes.
A long game, because when you're done with the game, you stop playing it. Okay, so it needs to be a long game.
Or repetitiveness.
And you want a game where you can be smart about it. You can be good at it. Yeah. Right. What genre fits those three things? Multiplayer games that you play against each other, and roguelikes.
Interesting.
What did the games industry do? We made multiplayer games. We made roguelikes. Why? Because they're the best thing to make right now. Because you will have free marketing forever.
How come there's not more co-op roguelites though? I feel like that's like a huge missed opportunity.
I mean, I think the honest answer, because it's harder to make and it doesn't give you much more of a benefit.
But is co-op that much more difficult to implement in a game like that? Like,
co-op is, yeah, we tried Nuclear Throne co-op. And like the biggest thing with co-op is that you want to balance it for both situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's hard because if I just make a single player game, done. Balance it against the player.
True.
If I do 2 players, now I have to balance it for 2 players, but it also needs to be fun to recover. If one player dies, the other player needs to be able. So how do you save that player? How do you make enemies that are more fun when they can be shot from both sides? In Nuclear Throne, we have an enemy that flies over you and then gets behind you. That's really good in single player. It's useless in co-op because you can just aim in 2 directions at once.
So you can't, exactly. Okay, so there's an inherent logic loop there as well that trickles down.
The problem with games is everything is more complicated than you think. Everything. Every single thing is more complicated. I did a thread on Twitter the other day about dice. How do you make dice in a game? You know how hard it is to make a dice in a game. Because you think, okay, you make a cube, you put some numbers on it, and then you roll it. Well, roll it is already a really big word, right? Because now we need collision, and it needs to roll well, and then, okay, done. Okay, so that's days of work to get it right. But then how do you know which number somebody rolled? I need to program that. So I need to go and be like, okay, wait. So, okay, we're going to put in the code. This side is 1, this side is 5, this side is 3, this side is 4, like do that. They all have to add up to 7. That's how a dice works. They're easy. Okay, cool. And now I'm going to, when it stops rolling, okay, now I need to define what does stop rolling mean?
Yeah.
When the speed hits 0, when the speed hits 0 and it stops moving, then it turns out that with collision, nothing actually goes to 0. It just asymptotically gets slower. So, okay, when it's under 0.1 movement per, okay. Now, what if it's on a slope? What if it falls off the level? It will just keep falling forever. So it will never calculate which side is up because it never stops moving. What if somebody walks into the dice? No, never. Okay, so I have to deal with all of that. Okay, and then when it's done, I'm gonna do a line from the top, and the first thing it hits, that's the number. Right? That's how we're going to do it. We're just going to see from the top, we're going to shoot a bullet down at the dice, and whichever side it hits, that's the one. Okay. Now, what if the dice ends up stuck diagonally and 2 sides are both at the top? It's like exactly curved. Yeah. How does the code do that? Because if you don't deal with that,
that's undefined. That just crashes the game. Yeah, I was going to say.
It'll crash. So you're going to have to figure out how you deal with that, right? So you might say, okay, if there's more than one answer, just wiggle the cube. Okay, we can do that. But then now suddenly the cube might keep wiggling because it wiggles, but it keeps wiggling in such a way that it remains there. So even just as simple as a dice, you get into these weird programmatical, philosophical situation. And that's just the physics part. Yeah. If you think about the morality and the fun of it, yeah. If you play with a real die, you know what could happen? You could roll 100 times in a row.
Yeah.
And you would look at the die and be like, this die is obviously broken. Right? So you might grab another die and you might still roll 1.
Yeah.
Chances are infinitesimally small, but it's possible. If you play a video game where your critical hit is dependent on a die roll.
Yeah.
And you don't get a 90% crit 3 times in a row, what do?
Get mad.
You quit.
Yeah.
Screw that.
Why did this is ridiculous. Why did the developers tell me
90%?
This is the case.
Yeah. 90%. That should definitely happen 9 out of 10 times, right?
Yeah. But
that's not how percentages work, right? It doesn't 90% doesn't mean 9 out of 10 times. It means every chance you have 90% chance that'll happen, which means you have 10% chance that it doesn't. So we code into our games ways to make die roll less unfair to you. If you roll 3 times, 3 times, we're just going to give it to you.
Can I ask a phenomenally stupid question? Can't you just pre-create like templates that manage those sort of movements in a sense, and then sell those packs to be like, if you need dice, this is how it works, is to give you the pre-formatted stuff over on
Yeah, you can do all sorts of things, but that's kind of the problem is, depending on your game, you might want your dice to behave differently.
Right? Okay, let's see what you're saying.
So if I want a die and I want it to behave a certain way, I want to do one way, but I might want dice that mostly roll a 4.
Do you think the complexity of any of these development aspects has functionally affected the direction of actual game development? Did you see any sort of game mechanics in your time in the industry just die off because people are like, we don't want to do this as a whole?
Absolutely. And I think the other part that is really true, it's also the response from the gamers, right? From the players. Because if you do a lot of work on somebody and nobody appreciates it, you're just not going to do it again.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
If you do something that looks very simple, but it is very complicated and it's not appreciated, you're just not going to do it again. And that happens frequently, right? Like systems where you look at it and you're like, wow, that's incredible. It's incredibly good work, craftswork in terms of craft. It's incredible. Destiny is a great example of that, where they're continuously working on balance, and balance sounds so easy. It's so hard. It's so hard. Balance is harder than anything.
Balancing and the continuation of development now leads me to a similar question, right? So like we're saying, before when you were making the die, right? You had this game comes out on this date and you got to get it ready to roll no matter what happens by that date. Now we've moved towards a looser structure. So like you say, game development responds to gamers. People showed they want free to play with battle passes, and they'll take a little bit of a hiccup in the development status of a game if they're still getting it for free, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
But do you think that's created a slightly more lazy product that does it really matter if that dice messes up? If anyone's like, yo, it's free to play.
I mean, I think it balances out. Like part of it is lazier, but part of it is way harder work. Because when I was done with my game, I was done with my game. So I never had to think about how the die might affect my future game.
You don't got to balance the die ever again.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Put the game out, I'm done. I walk away. Like you buy it, you buy it. You don't buy it, okay, cool, too bad. Now, if I make that die, I have to make sure that when I introduce a D20 in a future expansion, that doesn't break my other die. There was no D20 when I made the die, but now there is a D20, right? What if I make an expansion on a ship? Now the table is always moving. Now suddenly my collision code doesn't work anymore. Remember the code that I used to say, okay, let's check whether let's shoot from the top when the dice starts moving.
Can't find a line.
Now the entire ship is moving, so the dice never stops moving. So now the game crashes, right? So it's created a situation where there is much more work, but also it's a little bit more forgiving.
Yes,
right. It's
because
a bit more
of the
forgiving.
Complexity.
So people understand that, and I think that this has been sort of reassuring that gamers are a little bit more accepting of smaller issues. Right, big issues, they'll never accept that, and they're not wrong. I don't always
like
agree.
Something like Cyberpunk 2077 is a bit different than
unforgivable,
something else.
Right? Unforgivable.
Exactly.
Like and it's when money becomes too strong in decisions, right?
Yeah,
but
100%.
I was watching a video about the New Horizon Forbidden West and how Aloy is using the exact same animation in both the original and Forbidden West, and I'm like, obviously, why would you remake that?
That was like the God of War thing that came out when people were talking
With
about
the
both animations the same.
Of course. Do you think that 70% of the code is the same? Like, let's be honest. Like, we're doing the same video game. The logic is going to work the same way. We're going to evolve it. But
do you think that makes people a bit? See, that's a great one. So the 70% of that code should be the same, right? Arguably, because you're just making a sequel. So you say, hey, you guys love the base game. We're just going to improve the 30% of the code you didn't love and add some new stuff that doesn't break it. Right. But now people are like, well, this isn't as interestingly new as the first one because you guys built that first one from scratch. Right. Doesn't that create an inherent contradiction of, we need to stick with sustained IP continually versus we need new things?
The hardest thing in gaming is that people don't know what they want. They say whether they know what they want, but what they want is a better version of the thing that they already have. They don't want new. Nobody wants new. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by Henry Ford. If I had asked the consumer what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. Yeah. And that's exactly it. Gaming works the exact same way. People don't know what they want. That's why we, as game designers, have a hard job. Because we have to come up with stuff that nobody knows they want yet, believe in it long enough that we can test that they actually want it, and then release it. Chicken and egg. Everyone wants to see it proven on the market without proof that it exists. Right. But we have to start from the egg every single time. 100%. Right. We have to create an egg. We have to get, okay. So, it's sort of like a calcified outside, and it's kind of like a oval, but like in 3D. Right. Exactly. So that's kind of what we're doing. But, that code for Horizon, that 70% overlap, Most of that code is like light input. Why would you recreate how you press the X button? You press the X button, done. We keep that code. Why would we rewrite that, right? Like there's no reason for it. And then game logic, you can do in 30% of code, you can do a lot of stuff. Majority of your code is going to be related to like how the engine processes certain things. And you don't have to do, I don't think 70% code of reuse, but just as an example, right?
Exactly. Speculatively.
But the basic version is that game design is such a fascinating field because you're always on that balance between what do people understand and what is interesting. Because there's this thing called a mental model that we use in games. Mm-hmm. And a mental model is the understanding players have of games. We were talking about this earlier, the language of games. If I give you a racing game on the, what console do you play?
I play Xbox, let's say.
Xbox.
Or PlayStation, Nintendo.
Forza.
No
right?
racing games on Nintendo.
Forza.
Yes.
What is accelerate? What button
R
do you
trigger.
press? R trigger. Right. Yeah. That's it.
Automatic.
Done. Automatic. You don't have to think about it. That's part of your mental model. You have this understanding of what a game is, even before you play it. A game has started before you play it because you have knowledge. If you watch that trailer, the game has started.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch the announcements, the game has started because now you're creating expectations, you're creating feelings, you're creating those
based
have
off your
to be paid
interactions
back.
with versions of those.
With earlier versions, though, earlier games in the genre, earlier games in. If you see a 2D platform game and you get an ability and now you can reach somewhere new, you immediately think Metroidvania.
Yeah.
And you start to apply those expectations, right? Now that happens always in the player's brain. We can't get out of that. That is continuously happening, right? If we move away from that, that's a cost. It's expensive. So if I make a racing game and I want to add shooting to my car, what is shoot in most games?
R trigger.
Which one goes on R trigger? Race or shoot?
I don't. That's a mapping of function buttons.
You have to figure that out. There's no answer. Whatever it is, though, there's going to be the group of people that is upset because you put race on R trigger. There's going to be the group of people that are upset that you put shoot on R trigger because they expected the other one.
This is a great segue. So then, do you think, by nature of having to make those decisions, right? You're talking about weighing the decisions of comfort, of people's knowledge, and trying to do these sort of more, you even want to call them radical, you just call them slightly different, innovative, right?
Right.
Innovative is the word. In your time, do you think now this obsession of, we got to make, like, because it's become such an economic industry, same way with movies, right? You got to do the IP in a certain way and make certain comic book movies. So games, let's move away from innovation and the small indie films and the crafts creations that people love. Does that cut off the top level innovation that we're just going to be getting stuff that is similar to what people are familiar with because we're just looking for money? And then now innovation slows and people say, where's the new games?
Yeah, I think what happens is there's sort of two movements in games. You've got the indie scene. The indie scene is beholden to economics, right? We still have to make money. In that regard, a lot of indies have to be even safer than AAA because this is their income. They don't have other income. Large corporations, large game studios have 2 or 3 games in the fire at any given time. So if one of them fails, okay, that's sad. There's going to be layoffs. There's going to be problems, but there will be continuation of the studio, and for most of the people working there. For an indie, if your game fails, you're done. But indies also don't have as much expectations weighing down on them, right? They have a lower financial risk because if you fail, it's just you, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have that freedom, indies make a lot of very innovative work, right? A lot of innovation comes from that. But we can't push certain innovation as much as AAA can. So the loop that I always like to describe, the best example I have is the original BioShock AAA game. Mm-hmm. Right? The original BioShock was a game in which you walked around and you got to like interact with this world, and it was this fascinating world. It was this shooter in a fascinating world. And then a number of designers that worked on a DLC there wondered, what if you just take that looking at things? You can just grab things and you can look at them and explore the world that way. And they ended up making a game called Gone Home. And Gone Home ended up being an indie hit. And it was effectively the pitch for Gone Home internally for that team was, what if we made BioShock without shooting? So they made a BioShock without shooting, and they focused it on like grabbing these things and getting to understand this space, this house, right? And the stories that happened in it. And then the people at Naughty Dog who made Uncharted played Gone Home. And they thought, oh, this mechanic of looking at stuff is so cool. We should put that in Uncharted. And that's where in Uncharted, that system where you can grab things and look at them came from. But Uncharted can push that way further into way different context than an indie game could.
100%.
And then obviously indies play Uncharted and they go like, oh, that from Uncharted is really cool. So the way it works is indies make leaps, right? And then AAA incrementally, like very small increments, adjusts along. But then it's always AAA that makes the big breakthroughs. Almost always, right? It's always the bigger games, the bigger budgets. You know, you have things like PUBG, and it's an indie game, but it's huge.
Yeah.
But if you ask where it comes from a mod of a game that was funded by the American Army. Yeah. Right.
From an individual person as well. So it wasn't a team. It wasn't a...
Right. But it comes from something with big money, and then somebody small makes like a thing, and then everybody else jumped on it, and then it was Fortnite. Right. And a Fortnite sort of coalesces it into the history of gaming. PUBG will be in the history.
Where's the line between cloning on that though? Right? Because like I remember that was a little bit of, you took a lot of elements, because I remember Fortnite, they were into the world. So they weren't even in a similar, for people might not know, weren't doing a battle royale. They saw PUBG's success and they adopted it, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think you dealt with this in the past as well with Vlambeer when you guys were releasing your early games, and now there's still literally Wordle is getting a lot of copies now. Unpacking, which was a popular indie game, is getting a lot of clones.
So sad.
Where's the line there?
For me, it's the line between inspiration and imitation. And that's soft, but the reality is that this has to be a soft line. It has to be.
You know it when you see it.
When I got cloned, one of the discussions I ended up having a lot is like, shouldn't there be copyright for game mechanics?
Yeah.
And in the back of my mind, I suddenly went like, what if Nintendo had copyrighted Jump?
Yeah. Platformers could be dead.
Entire genres would have been obliterated instantly, right? I was like, this should never happen. We should never reach a point where that line is so defined that somebody can abuse it, right? So to me, it's if you play a game, you go like, this is incredible. I'm going to take this part and I'm going to see if it fits in my game, see if it fits in the puzzle. That's inspiration. I'm okay with that. But if you open the one game on your one screen and you have your code for the other game on your other screen and you're just replicating, that's too far for me. And that's what you're seeing with Unpacking right now, right? And it's sad because these games literally look like they are unpacking. They're taking the visual style. They're taking everything.
How do they clone it so quickly? Do they take the base code and like rewrite it? Like, I don't get how it would take the developer so long to make it themselves, but then these clones can come out.
So here, I know your answer for that one. Remember when I asked you to choose between where the right trigger goes?
Yeah.
Right? All right. What's your answer?
Right trigger.
Oh, yeah, so the right trigger. Do we do shooting or driving?
Oh, I'm going to do driving, and I'm going to do shooting with RB.
Shooting with RB. So you're going to use both those fingers.
Yeah, both of those
fingers. So if you want to shoot and you're going to
drive and then you click. Yeah.
All right. So your shooting has to be binary. Either you're shooting or you're not shooting. You can't like tap tap. Okay. Okay, that's how you do it, right? So you would go and test this. So you would make it, you would test it, you would play with some players, you would see if it comes back, and then you go, okay, maybe RB might not be the right button. Let's try A real quick, just to have an alternative. So now you're 4 or 5 weeks in, right? And you've decided that button. If I wanted to clone that, how much time would it take me? 0 seconds. I look at what you did.
How can I reverse engineer what you did? What
because I can just play the game
at it?
Yeah, right trigger is drive, A is shoot. Done.
The designs in the game.
That's it. The biggest part of game development is testing. It's trying things out and testing. We don't know what we're doing, mate. Like, people think that we know what we're doing. Game developers don't know what we're doing.
A lot of GitHub guys.
We got very good at not knowing what we're doing. That's what a game developer really is. A game developer is somebody who sits down and you take God of War and you go, what if the camera never moves away? What if there's no cutscene that isn't starting from the game? What if it always is there? What if this game is that intimate, right?
What an incredible mechanic. I just want to say quickly.
Incredible delivery, incredibly well executed.
Incredible.
But after they did that, it was so much easier for everybody else to do it.
Yeah. I think
because everybody else
like another game do it.
Of course,
like,
because now we can just look at God of War and be like, oh, okay, so here's kind of what they're looking for. Here's how they do it, and that idea of like, okay, so when the camera zooms
go
in
between
and
the
out,
rocks and you're viewing
that you steal things, right?
Yeah.
You take that and you take like, okay, this works, that works, that works. So when you spend 3-6 weeks testing out where that shoot button goes, where that drive button goes, all I have to do is boot up your game and look at your controller mapping. And I'm done. Don't have to test it. I already know it works, right? So for unpacking, that mechanic of putting stuff away, nobody had ever done that before. So that must have taken months and months and months of figuring out like, where's the fun? Is it fun?
Yeah.
Right? And then if it's fun, how complex can it be? Is it fun if you can place anything anywhere you want? Or do we need to lock certain items to specific places, right?
If
you have to design that, it takes months. If you need to copy it, it takes seconds.
If you need to bake a cake from scratch and you don't have a recipe, it's a lot more difficult than if someone hands you the recipe and says, this is how you bake this cake.
That's exactly it. If you have the cake in front of you and you're like, okay, it needs to be like this, that's already a lot easier. Even without the recipe. Without the recipe, it's a lot easier to look at a food and be like, okay, so this is pasta, and then just have a bite, and it's like tomato, might be, I don't know, something salty.
You're going to get it close enough, though. It's not going to be
perfect. And that's exactly what a clone is.
That's hilarious.
That's exactly what a clone is. You nailed it.
Too funny. And that's a little bit deeply disappointing, because I think it creates a saturation to the market, which actually touched on one of the Twitter conversations today, which was, people talking about, hey, there should be less indie game devs, right. And there's too many games. I mean, right. I get that from even like a writer's perspective, to be like, there's too many books out there, but no one ever says don't write, right? And just understand that your chance of being a famous writer might not be it.
Yeah, I think that's the important part, because I was part of that discussion partially, because Jeff, who wrote this, I think, he's right. There's too many indie games. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't make indie games. You should understand that to make money with a game is really hard in this market, because there's so many indie games. Does that mean that we have enough games? No, we never have enough games. Please make games. But I understand how much time, how much money, how much effort it costs to make a game. And I also don't feel comfortable saying like, oh no, there need to be more games. Go make games. Doesn't matter. Go make games. Hopefully it'll work out, right? As a Muslim, inshallah, it'll work out.
Inshallah. And
you can't tell that to people. You can't go to people and be like, oh, you might be broken a year, but hey, you should really make that game. Just don't think about it. Make art, I can't
art
say
is
that.
Commercial. Proper art is commercial,
Art can be many things, but what is important in what he said in the first tweet only, because he goes into like, you shouldn't make games, which I fully disagree with, right?
Fully.
But you need to understand that if you're going to make games, that you don't stand a chance. That you just don't stand a chance. That your competitors are people that have been making games for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. That they have connections with Valve, that they have connections with Xbox, with PlayStation, with the press, that they know people at IGN, that they know Twitch streamers that are popular, that they know people on YouTube, that they get interviewed.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that people listen to that to learn.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what you're competing with.
If you media org, I know that feeling.
If you accept that and you understand the risk and you understand the opportunity, then please make games. Please make games. We need more games. We always need more games. We need more games of every genre. We need more experiments in every genre. We need more indies with fresh attitudes in every genre. We need more people who don't care whether the game is successful or not in every genre. But I don't want them to hurt themselves doing it. But I don't want them to get a mortgage to make their game and then end up in $100,000 of debt. Right.
This is where we now deal with, I know you are a huge proponent of diversity and inclusion, right? Mm-hmm. And as someone who's of South Asian descent myself, I see that the diversity in the industry is at a minimal version, right? And I don't want to sit here and say, wow, inherent diversity. It's just still like what we're saying. It's become so saturated on the indie front for new people who don't have connections to come in, and so consolidated on the larger front that if you don't have established connections, it'll be hard to get into.
Yep.
Where is the opportunity for diversity inclusion to open the door?
It has to be made. It has to be intentional. Somebody has to do it. I mean, it's part of what I've been doing for the past 10 years is trying to go to these places, meet the developers, wherever they are, whether they're in South America, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in South Asia, West Asia, whether they're in the Pacific Islands. I don't care, East Europe, you know, wherever they are. I think everybody should have access to those connections. Everybody should have access to the press. Everybody should have access to the engines. Everybody should have access to the platforms. I'm just one person. I can't solve that alone. But I think what you're seeing is every time one of these communities, a city in Brazil, you know, like a place in Pakistan or in South Africa or in Namibia or wherever, right? Mm-hmm. When momentum starts, you can't stop it. Yes. When it starts going, when somebody makes a hit, they bring in some money. United States dollars, which are relatively valuable, right? Yeah. If you take $1 in the US, you can barely buy a sandwich with it, right? But if you go to like many of the countries around the world, that's actually a pretty decent amount of money. If you can make small games that make $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, you can actually make bigger games with that. That's what happened to CD Projekt Red. Yeah. Polish developer, they made The Witcher. It wasn't a hit, but they weren't expensive. So they can make The Witcher 2, which was better. And then they did a little better. And then they made The Witcher 3, and they made a lot of money, even by US standards, even by Western standards. They blew the lid off of like any budget that you could have imagined. And they made an incredible game. And, you know, then we'll stop the story there. But
that company to come from that story, I wonder what happened to them.
Yeah, this is very odd. We haven't really released a game for like almost a decade. Like this, it's been a while.
I'm hoping that they actually get around to developing one.
Right. Yeah, that'd be great. But such a sad story, that game. But the thing I'm getting at is that the only way to do that is if the industry wants to, because they have to make those connections. Yeah. And it's a long fight. It's a long fight. It's an exhausting fight. I've been fighting this fight for 10 years, and with me so many people, but it's happening. And it's happening slowly.
It's always like, hey, it's like our chicken and egg problem, right? Which is, hey, it has to be incentivized financially. And if we don't see the money there, therefore, why should we? And it's like, you're missing the point that if you did, you would see it on the back end in terms of what grows out of it.
The way I always explain to people why this is important is games are a fingerprint. They're made by people, and people put their fingerprint on it, whether they want it or not. So I tell you, think of a war game. Think of a war game.
Okay.
Which war game did you think of?
I thought of Command and Conquer Generals.
Command and Conquer Generals, right? Yeah. Which is a game about winning wars.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Call of Duty, game about winning wars. Battlefield, game about winning wars. Right. What do those games have in common?
Shooting.
Made in the United States. Okay. Made in the Western world, right?
Okay.
They're all about shooting or winning. Command and Conquer might be UK, but they kind of have the same attitude to war as the US does, right? Thing. It's about winning war.
Yeah.
Do you know any German war games?
You know, Germany doesn't try to make anything war related.
They made one.
But no.
Spec Ops: The Line. Spec Ops: The Line is a war game by Jagex from Germany. It's about shame. It's about trauma. So when the Germans make a war game, their fingerprint makes one of the most interesting war games in 2 decades of war games? 100%. What do you think when the Polish make a war game? What do you think happens?
It talks about the tragedy being in the middle of it.
So they make this war of mine. Polish game.
Interesting.
A game about being a survivor in a war that just happens around you. You don't get to influence that war. The war comes to you and wrecks your country.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened to Poland.
Yep.
Right.
100%. I always think about how the World War II experience affected Japan and its output following those generations of kids.
Those games from Japan are still about the big monster.
Yeah.
Right. About the thing that will wipe out everything. right? The
There's a
nuclear
reason.
bomb.
Exactly.
Right. So games are made by people, by fingerprints.
Yeah.
And every time we get another country to add to that, we get completely new games, completely new perspectives, completely new worlds. Spec Ops wouldn't exist made by an American. It can't, because it's a different viewpoint. Not because Americans are failing at something, not because they're bad at something, but because we've seen that story over and over. And that story has become commodified.
Yes. In its form, and they were going to repeat it in that commodified form until it's not able to be, until then the next thing comes in, right?
That's why it's important. That's why diversity is important, because when a woman makes a game with a certain perspective on certain things, they'll make a different game than a man. When a black man makes a game, it'll be different than a white man. When somebody who is gay makes a game, it'll be different than somebody who is straight. When somebody who is disabled, it will be different than an able-bodied person. When it is a Muslim, it will be different than an atheist. When it's an Arab, it'll be different than a Dutch person, right?
Absolutely.
But I want all those games.
But how do you find, like what we just talked about was like the West and Japan, which we even talked about from the beginning, are the sort of two central portions of game development.
Mm-hmm.
Which of those ideas are coming out of different places that you feel are sort of catching a little wind, right? Where you're like, okay, these are, but that'd be the biggest thing because it's moving and it's evolving, right? So even something like Twitch, a lot of top Twitch streamers are not US based. So like movies even now, Korean film, dramas, that subtitle concept has come over. You've been here long enough. What are you feeling about that internationalization? The same way Hollywood sort of flipped overnight, for some reason.
I think it's happening in games. It's taking longer because AAA game development is dependent on a lot of things. It's very expensive, and to be competitive, you kind of need the government to be behind it. Some of the best AAA places in the world are places like Montreal in Canada, where there's like a huge tax credit to get all these big companies to go there. The UK, or places where just there already is.
I know Netherlands and a lot of Western Europe does, as a smaller Western European country. The Nordic
Sweden
ones do that.
Yeah, Sweden does it really well as well. Yeah. So there needs to be support, right? There needs to be support, and that's really hard to do in countries that are, relatively poor or unstable. So that's harder. In indie, though, look at places like South Africa. Was nowhere, and then it just exploded onto the scene with incredible games from kind of everywhere throughout South Africa. But Indonesia, lots of indie names from Indonesia. Games like Coffee Talk are there, for example. Toge Productions is based there. More and more games come from the region, and because some of the studios are successful, they can help seed these other studios with knowledge, with funding. They can create grants. They can talk to the government, lobby to get some support, and show to the government that if you invest $100 into the games industry, we'll make you $1,000.
100%. Which
bring that into
odd because of the amount of outsourcing that goes to all of these countries in technology and development. But they don't necessarily, they go to specific, like it's almost like manufacturing. They just want the automated base level. Right. And then anything more sophisticated, they say, send it back to us and we'll put it together.
Right. And then the interesting thing about that is, for example, I worked in India 7 years ago when India was sort of switching from being an outsourcing country because they got so good at their job that they started getting a bit more expensive. Yeah. That ended up being a problem because they had incredible programmers, incredible artists, incredible sound engineers, very few designers. Because the designer would usually be from a company abroad. Will be some French guy that would tell them what the game was going to be. So a big challenge in India was getting the designers trained to be good enough to compete with the Western games because they already had everything else, right? So each community is its own puzzle. Absolutely. But each community, as soon as it gets momentum, as soon as it gets that money, as soon as it gets resources, as soon as it gets connections, it rolls and you can't stop that train. It keeps rolling. It keeps growing. So I'm very hopeful. I'm seeing around the world in Latin America, in Central America, and Africa, both North and South Africa, a little bit in Central Africa, Southwest Asia, West Asia, South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, everywhere. Yeah. Eastern Europe, Central Europe. It's happening. Like games are now, all that needs to happen is the world needs to give those games a chance. And they're not going to give every game a chance because like with any game made in the West, the chances of your game getting noticed, approximately zero. But if there can be enough games from those places, something will hit, right?
Absolutely.
And it'll be the next big thing.
I couldn't agree more. And I do think the next big thing in gaming will not be a US based concept. I think that we've sort of moved past that. And I only say that as a fan of gaming myself, who's sort of seen a diminishing innovation, right? Or something that feels
right. Yeah, because it's the same perspective. And the only way to grow that is fresh perspective, which is why that discussion about diversity is such a big conversation in games. We need perspective. We need people that are different, making these games, making these decisions, making these choices, because that's how you get different new stuff. Yeah. And then everybody else can copy it, which is great. Right. We build on it.
If they know at the end, they'll still be incentivized because they can copy it and bring it back, but it's still in their own interest, in the industry's interest to expand its pool and base. And I think, that's the reason of that definition of a gamer question, because it's, if we keep going to these specific models of, if you pick up your phone and you play Candy Crush, you have to be a gamer, because if they release something else, you'll want to try it, right? Yep. And so I guess now, I'll just do one or two more questions, because I know you're about to be getting to sleep. So I don't want to be spending too much of your time. Now, I know a lot of people said, what are the biggest trends you saw in mobile gaming, et cetera? But I guess my question would be more specifically, do you see mobile gaming or becoming more socially oriented in what they'll be doing in terms of co-ops? I can imagine co-ops are a bit easier to implement on mobile, and that social experience. Do you think we'll start separating the experience of what type of games we get on mobile versus console? Or do you think that sort of Genshin Impact concept, which I saw you answer in another question, the cross-platform concepts of, hey, you can play on mobile, pick it up on your, will be continuing and sort of consolidating further? Or do you think there'll be a separation in the type of games?
I think you'll see further consolidation, but also stronger differences. So it's kind of a weird one. I think what you'll see is, as people make games, they're more aware of the opportunity of mobile. If you compare a PUBG on PC versus PUBG on mobile, I think PUBG on mobile made a lot more money.
PUBG mobile in India and Pakistan, in the international community, is gigantic.
It's enormous. It's like
Fortnite doesn't exist internationally, for people who might not know. Yeah.
It's a lot more focused. Yeah, it's a lot more focused, Fortnite. But when you look at PUBG and you compare the PC version, which we think of as a monster hit, you compare it to the mobile version like is enormous compared to PC in terms of revenue, right? So I think a lot of companies have seen the opportunity of mobile. They've seen it with Fortnite, they've seen it with PUBG, they've seen it with Call of Duty. Having your game on multiple platforms helps, right? So that consolidates, because as people are designing these games, they're thinking about, how can we make the port as easy as possible? How can we make sure that as much of this experience also works on mobile? So the industry term for it is surfaces, right? You've got your TV surface, which is your console surface. You've got your desktop surface. You've got your mobile surface. You might have a streaming surface. You have these different surfaces that you might be playing your game on: tablet, mobile, PC, console, Steam Deck soon, right? And as we design, we try to keep in mind that we're going to hit these other surfaces. So if you're designing a game and it needs to work on PC only, you're only thinking about two input methods. Yeah. Keyboard, controller, because some people play with controller. Now, if you include that controller support, you already got console. Yeah. Right. So that's good. Let's say, okay, keyboard and mouse and controller. So now we're hitting some of those surfaces. But now you also have to do mobile. Now you suddenly think, okay, how much of this would work on a touchscreen? Yeah. Right. And now you're redesigning some of your controls to also work on a touchscreen. Right. So that consolidates. It limits the potential for creativity. Yeah. On the flip side, it also means that a lot of games on mobile are going to be available on all those platforms. And usually the games that do super well on mobile are games that are unique to mobile, that really use that phone, that really use the opportunity of that phone. Yeah. And I think as the AAA sort of influence on mobile consolidates into basically being mobile versions of big AAA games, that there'll be more space for creative work. Right. Hopefully.
Absolutely. Hopefully. I mean, all of this opens up the end of, like, the trickle down version of, as we said, the innovation at the bottom can trickle up top, and then the money from the top can trickle up bottom. There's a middle point where it can meet, and that's where you usually get the best. like you said,
I think
the
so.
object rotation, etc.
Right.
But it's a very curious time during the industry. I know we didn't get too much time to talk about the Activision Blizzard buy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because I'm partially terrified of it, honestly.
Yeah.
I love Microsoft as they are right now. Right.
Yeah. I thought they were creating a perfect tertiary company in the space, sort of regaining their foothold that they had with the 360 era.
Right. And they are. But then I remember that
now they're Tencent. Now they're Western Tencent, realistically.
Right. I just remember that after the 360 came the Xbox One.
Yeah.
Right. And it was Don Matrick, and he was doing awful stuff. Right. And I'm just thinking, if Microsoft soon owns Activision Blizzard, and Phil leaves, right? Does Activision survive? Does Blizzard survive? Does Diablo survive? Do they can Diablo? Right? Is that not the right brand for not this Halo? Microsoft? But
because they could. Doesn't that put a cap on the success Halo needs if you suddenly bring in Call of Duty and everybody else? Like you don't need any of these guys.
That's kind of the thing, right? Like we don't know what this does. What I do know is I love when there's room for creativity in games. And with this whole switch to subscription, which is probably the biggest trend in games, you asked about that earlier. I think subscription is, after Twitch, is going to be the most influential thing in games at the moment. Is people aren't making games anymore to sell them. People are making games to sell them to Xbox, to sell them to Game Pass, to sell them to ID at Xbox, to sell them to Apple Arcade, to sell them to Epic.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's how we make sure we make money. If I'm spending $500,000 on making a game, and a lot of indie games are $500,000, if Microsoft comes to me and they say like, hey, you know what, we'll guarantee you $250,000 of revenue or something, right? We'll pay
guaranteed money for people who would need it. Yeah,
we'll pay you half of your development budget to get the game out, launching on Xbox, Game Pass for free or for a certain amount of time, or Apple funds development for a game for Apple Arcade, or Epic buys exclusivity. If you give me half of my budget, for sure, I'm going to take that deal.
100%.
Of course, I'm going to take that deal.
I mean,
but that also means that if I'm designing a game, that I'm designing it with in mind, like, I want to sell this to Microsoft.
It's like in technology when companies build to get acquired, right? We've entered a cynical version of it. So do you think, do you think that would, I guess, so because I know what you're saying was there does create that version of we're just selling directly to, and again, it's an innovation issue, but like, does that consolidation mean that we'll end up seeing, I'm trying to figure out how to word my question here, because you bring up a great point in the subscription models, that it's just an IP race, right? Do you think that Xbox will end up sitting on this and saying like, I know the second they bought Activision Blizzard, I was like, obviously they're going to honor the contracts that already exist. Right. But like they did with Bethesda, the next games after those contracts, they're not putting out on PlayStation. It's obvious.
Probably
no one
not.
needs to tell me.
Probably not.
Like and Phil Spencer, like you said, he could be benevolent, but I don't want to create a drone program and hand it to the next person who might not be the person you want. Yep. And those sort of systems are called the slippery slope model, which is if that guy like Don comes up and takes over Xbox, we're going to kill one of the most storied, gaming developers of all time. Potentially.
But that's the other part of it is like as these models grow, where developers are dependent on these big companies to fund their games, they start making those games for those companies. The same way we started making roguelikes and multiplayer games because of Twitch. Yeah. Right. Game development will always adjust to its context because it is incredibly risky. You're spending $500,000. Some of my games, small indie games, $500,000 budget, right?
Yeah.
So when I start selling that game at $10, I need to sell 50,000 copies to get back to the start.
Yeah.
That's a lot of copies
on mobile.
Right. So if you're making $500,000 game and you're doing it on mobile for $2, you see that's 250,000 units you need to sell before we can start talking about making your next game. So if some of these companies come along and say like, okay, we'll pay you $100,000, of course you're going to take it. But that also means that when you start working on your next game, you're going to go in and go, okay, remember that boardroom at Platform X that gave us money?
Yeah. What type of games were they looking for again?
What do they want?
Yeah.
And that scares me. That's the part that's scary to me, because I don't want that world. I want a world where people make games that fit the market. And I know that's nonsense, because we're already making what the market wants. We're already making what Twitch wants. I just don't want another checkbox on that.
But it's just different when there's 5 options. It's still different when there's 2 options. It's still an exponential effect on what is allowed. And
everything that disappears is bad. You're absolutely right.
Consolidation is just not good in any industry. We've been seeing it in tech, right? Where now any game developer that comes up with something interesting, they might get Snapchatted by Xbox, right? And that's not the same as being inspired by. That's saying, hey, I like your model, I'm going to do it too. Right. Which creates maybe a more competitive, a more maliciously competitive gaming industry. Whereas right now, I don't think it's ever been like that. I think it's just been business.
It's been good. It's been bad, but it's never been to the point where I worry about what the future holds. And I'm a little worried now. Like I said, I love Microsoft. I love the things that they're doing. Phil is great. Chris Charla is great. Like the entire team over there, they care so much and they love games so much. But I also know just that they're gonna leave. What am I gonna do? Like then go like, oh no, please don't destroy Activision Blizzard.
Yeah.
Like we own it,
please sir, one more Diablo.
Yeah.
And it's like, we could have done this by just separating the two.
Right. I don't know. And then the indie part is the other part that terrifies me, because I don't want every indie to make a game where they go like, can we sell this to ID at Xbox? Like I just don't want that world.
You get the same thing that you've got in music, which is a flattening of experience, because everything needs to fit into the mold that will be particular type of commercial.
Everybody needs to make a thing that works on Spotify, so make that dynamic video and add those lyrics. And
remember, 20 songs, because you got to get the streaming numbers, and the quality really doesn't matter.
Yep.
Get one
YouTube video needs to be 10 minutes, mate. Even if it's not.
Get on Instagram and act like an idiot, and it's like, wait a second.
That's all the things you need. That's suddenly everybody is that, right? In their own way, but everybody has to be that, because that works.
And that's the problem, where everyone can have a little bit of space, but has to be this. And I found that in gaming media to be the case. I found in gaming content creators to be the case, where you see a lot of these content creators be like, I hate having to play this game every day, but if I go to variety streaming, they won't love me anymore. And I think you'll see the same with developers. If you only have Twitch to go to, you only have this. So I don't like Facebook, but at least they did Facebook gaming, right?
Right. That's the thing, right? Like, and then Facebook is its own problem, because there's no competitor for Facebook. So in that space, they're everything. And it's the world is in a pretty messy state when it comes to business at the moment.
It is.
Really is.
Consolidation has never been good. And I think we just let all of the medium companies, like we let the middle of America, sort of just disappear. And I don't think we realize how fundamentally important that was for both sides. Like an ecosystem, you need balance. If we cut the balance out, negative side effects that we aren't anticipating are going to occur very rapidly and out of size as well. But I'm going to ask you one more question. I know you're about to get tired. So this is a classic one that we ask every guest.
Okay, cool.
What is one book, story, movie, comic, or any form of fiction that you personally would love to see made into a video game? So your favorite piece of fiction, etc. Like you'll be like, I want a video game. So in past ones, we've had Ed, and Eddie, the cartoon. We've had I gotta remember a couple of these. We had a civics simulator. That was the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, but that was sort of obvious. The creative director of Coldwood Studios, the maker of Unravel, Martin Celine, he picked Berserk. The anime is the one to see. Oh wait, no, that was him. He picked, that was a Juice. So we have a couple of answers, but what are you thinking?
What should be a video game? There's a book by a guy named Carl Schroeder called Ventus, and it is a fantasy sci-fi world that is built around ideas of sentience and AI. And I think I want a very familiar, cozy game in that world. Not like something revolutionary. I want like a Final Fantasy-esque big game world game in that world, because it's just a fascinating world. I read that book like once every 2 years or 3 years or something. Because it starts as a fantasy book, and then suddenly spaceships start arriving, and you're like, what? Huh? And I want that moment in a video game where you're like, you're upgrading your sword, and then just a spaceship arrives, and you're like, what?
It doesn't look like it fits in this aesthetic.
What is happening? That sounds really cool. I've never seen that really happen in a game.
I don't think I've ever seen that either.
Final Fantasy
You might have found some inspiration for your next game.
Right. Final Fantasy always walks that really cool boundary between like medieval and sort of like future tech, but never that big of a difference.
Steampunk. It's like when you see the Blade Runner stuff and I see like the massive industrial like leftover stuff, and I'm like, why would they do that in a futuristic technology world? And now when I see that certain analog things work better than digital, I'm like, oh, that's why that still works like that in the future. Now I get it.
I'm becoming a pilot, and like the little airplane that I fly is a Cessna 172, and the one I fly is from like the 70s, and it's all like old gear. And you ask them why, and they're like, well, because this thing has kept people alive for 45 years.
This is the best we've constructed.
I cannot argue with that logic, as this thing works. It works well, and if it doesn't work, people die. So the fact that it still works means that it's the best option we get. Like,
if it's not broken, don't fix it. They're like, it works 99% of the time. You don't want to like take a risk with that. I'm like, you know what? Let's keep it like that for now.
Yeah, we'll keep the 100% of the time. Any airplane that you can fly has not crashed.
As someone who's afraid of flying, as long as it does not crash,
right,
I'm chilling. I'm at the happy ending. I'm like, it flies, it lands, we're good. Doesn't matter.
Yep, we're good.
I don't want to ask you any questions, but
my instructor always says taking off is optional, but landing is required. He's not wrong. They have a lot of sayings like that. It's been really fun to learn how to fly.
That's funny. But that would be all I got. I really appreciate you taking the time. I had a really nice chat. That was super awesome.
This was fun.
Would love to have you back on the show sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Just sort of casually talk, as these sort of things happen in the industry.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
I'd love that. Thank you so much for having
developers.
Me.
Like, I'm an arm's length away from the whole industry and all the knowledge and the people. So I'm like, hey, it's really cool to have someone who has been in a very sort of functional, vital part of help setting it up to be like, hey, you're not always wrong. I'm like, well, I guess I'm getting somewhere.
That's kind of the beauty of this industry. I think like what is right now is not going to be right in 2 years, right?
Yes.
So let's talk again sometime in the future and see how much we still agree on.
Absolutely. I'm gonna get a list of all of our bets and guesses, and we'll come back around and be like, so
that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. Let's do that. Thanks for having me.
I look forward to it. Thank you again, Rami. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.